Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I see folks coming onto the call now. My name is Anissa Avon, and I'm excited to introduce you guys to Rob Catalano. Hello, Rob.
Hi there, everyone.
He is the CEO of Work Tango, which happens to be the Chief Engagement Officer. And our conversation today is about how to engage employees in uncertain times. It's definitely the theme that many of us have, how to keep them engaged, how to ensure that we maintain some culture and some connection when our lives are in chaos. So we're going to get started right away. I want to say thank you to our sponsors. Our first sponsor is the Whitmarsh Consulting Group. And David Whitmarsh and his team of super talented HR information technology consultants and multi-channel marketing experts have been such a strong asset for me and my company. And then I also want to say thank you to Insperity. Insperity is HR that makes a difference. Now, I know that a lot of our clients and friends and peers may not be a good fit for a large HR outsourcing company like Insperity. Doesn't matter. They have offered a free HR financial analysis report and debrief, including an HR budget analysis, a confidential report, and a one-on-one debrief for anyone that signs up at that link you see on the screen, turnkeycoachingsolutions.net/HR report. They do know that not everyone is a good fit, but that is something that they said we are willing to give away. We know that things are difficult right now. We know that a lot of HR departments have probably just finished, in some cases, their budget before COVID-19 struck us. And now they're having to totally revamp their entire strategic plan and their budget. So if they can be of service to you, don't hesitate to take them up on that offer. And then I also want to say that my team, I just want to say thank you to my team at TurnKey Coaching and Development Solutions. I founded the company originally in 2004, and over the years, we have been faced with many challenges, nothing quite as stark as this pandemic. And when I went to my team and I said, what are we going to do and how are we going to serve? And immediately the idea came together, and we reached out to folks like you, Rob, and said, how can we be of service at this time? We have over 1,000 coaches and trainers around the country and key hubs globally. And the response to step up and provide subject matter expertise as it relates to managing remote teams, crisis management, business continuity, you name it, has really been impressive. Will you go to the next slide for me?
Yeah.
Leading in a crisis, actionable business and HR strategies for navigating crisis and change. We are constantly adding new speakers. It now looks like we're going to go into May because, well, hopefully we won't still be on lockdown, but I think I may be wishful thinking. So do come back again to our site, the Leading in a Crisis Hey Summit site, and check out our new talks. We're adding them all the time right now. Two things I want to mention very briefly is one, we have a special going of virtual training, buy one, get one, specifically around crisis management, leadership, and competence during this difficult time. And the other thing I want to mention is we have put together some pretty impressive career coaches and outplacement coaches and packages that are name your own price. We wanted to do something that would be meaningful, that would still support our internal team. And your team. So we have two packages. One is specifically for retained leaders, and the other is for outplacement coaching, supporting those who unfortunately you may be having to lay off. So I'm super excited to introduce you guys to Rob. Rob has deep experience with engagement. Before Work Tango, he was one of the founding employees of Achievers. He's literally spent the last 17 plus years consulting companies on employee engagement and building HR technology. And this is kind of a cool little award there, dude. This 100 top, named of the 100 top global employee engagement influencers.
It's a mouthful, isn't it?
Right? So tell us a little bit about you and what we're going to learn today.
Yeah, so first off, thanks TurnKey for having me. That's my Bitmoji. That's what I looked like before being in isolation for about 4 weeks. until I grew all this hair and this beard and much grayer than it used to be. But again, really appreciate having me here to talk about, how to navigate through engagement through crisis. As mentioned, I've spent so many years helping companies from a consulting perspective or building technology companies. And I spend most of my time in these two organizations. Worktango is the one that I founded recently that helps companies hear the voice of employees. And also I run another organization called Innovate Work, which we bring the HR and leadership community together to talk about these type of topics. I also do a lot of other things in different communities around the world of engagement. So best things to say is I'm super passionate about this. This is my ability to kind of have a wisdom of crowds approach, like sharing what I know, what I've learned over the years through customers and through experiences. I've been through a couple of downturns myself in the workplace already. So really just want to share kind of my knowledge with everyone here today.
Great. Excellent.
So we'll dive right in. I know it was mentioned, let's make this interactive. Let's talk about, if there's questions, we'll try to address them. I've given full permission to interrupt me. I will not get offended. We can dive deeper into things if needed.
Right.
And I noticed some people here from Houston, Boulder. That's awesome. I'm actually sitting in Toronto right now. It's getting a little sunny. It wasn't that sunny like 15 minutes ago, but not as warm as where some of you guys are. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I'd like to set the stage first before diving into the topic. And first thing is that when I think about the best way I can illustrate what a lot of people are feeling right now, it's this wave of uncertainty, right? It's this wave crashing down, and uncertainty is happening at a couple of layers. First one is we're hearing everything that's happening in the market, right? Like, oh my gosh, what's happening with, it doesn't matter what market you're looking at, if it's the FTSE 100, we're looking at worse weeks than what we saw from the dot-com bubble, the financial crisis, Black Monday. I was in the workplace for all of those, so I think I'm aging myself. But actually, despite all this negative stuff in the market, I want to share some positives. Apparently, frozen concentrated orange juice is the best performing commodity. So if breaking news by the BBC here, but if you did want to invest and you need some time on your hands, there might be something there.
Beautiful.
But outside of the markets, think about from markets down to companies. Now, this is actually a really cool site. It's called Candor, and it's showing a live update based on contributions out there of different industries and whether they're freezing or laying off employees, right? So not just at the market level, but the individual companies. And this is about taking, about 1,000 companies. It doesn't matter what industry you're in, energy, 91%, all the way down to communications, productivity, 42 and 36%. Companies aren't hiring either, right? This is impacting them as organizations as well. So we talk about the market, we talk about the business, but what I want to talk about is a little more, what about employees, right? What about the people in organizations? And by the way, when you search employees in Google, this is the first picture that comes up. So I don't know, this looks like my employees. I don't know if it looks like yours, but I always find it funny to see things like this, that our teams definitely do not look like that. But what I mean in terms of, when we talk about employees, I want to share some insight into the Worktango world. We ask our employees every single week, how do you feel about work this week? And we do this for our customers. We get sentiment in real time about how employees are feeling for different purposes. But this is an example of the one question, the responses over the last 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. I work with a great team, talented group, and 3 weeks ago, end of February, all of March, 100% engagement in our organization. There was positive responses to this, to their experience at work. However, the last 3 weeks, that's dropped, pretty dramatically. And the thing is as a business leader, this scares me, right? In terms of the engagement of organizations at this time. Now, what's interesting is this is just one company, but we do this for many other organizations. What we're starting to see is in a 30-day time period, a lot of the data we've been collecting, we're seeing engagement levels drop by 40%, right? We're seeing concepts or sentiment around communication and people feeling like they're being communicated to down 59%. And even more alarming is questions around company outlook, right? The success of the organization coming through this crisis with COVID, down 82%. So what's interesting is it's not just the markets, it's not just the companies. When we look at how employees are feeling and their sentiment around the environment around them, I kind of liken it to, the upside down. If anyone watched Stranger Things, you know what this is. If you don't, you're missing out. If anyone has any ideas for what else I can binge watch on Netflix, let me know. Put it into the chat. I need some ideas. But if you're not familiar with this is an alternate universe, right, that lives in Stranger Things. We are not in this alternate universe in real life right now. right? This is actually happening.
Yeah.
So what I want to talk, BoJack Horseman. All right, I got some people. Ozarks. Yes, I just finished Ozarks. It's amazing. But the reason why I bring this up is that I want to talk about 4 major things today. First is the impact of uncertainty in the workplace and why it really matters. So we'll talk about that briefly. Then I want to get into the brunt of the conversation, which is 4 approaches to engage employees in these uncertain times. Now, outside of the theory and some really great examples, I want to end it with 4 mindsets to start with, right? If you need to go down this road or down this journey, where do you really start? And all through my idea is to share some examples, right? To inspire action, for anyone here that's looking to change things in their organization, their departments, their companies, you name it. So first thing, every time I talk about something, I always ask, who cares? Right? And if you're rolling your eyes saying, should we care about this? By the way, if you search who cares in Google, this comes up. So I think this is
that's perfect.
Way better than like employees searching on Google. But I want to spend not a lot of time here, but we all know why engagement is important. And I hope you do. Here's all the metrics. I'm not going to share them with you and read them off. You can have the slides later. My hope is that we understand engagement's impact in organizations on profitability, sales, customer sat, you name it. And if you don't like numbers and stats, I always say this is the best way I can describe disengagement. So, if you want to look at it that way, this is what we don't want our employees doing. So again, you may not like the metrics, but maybe this works for you.
Yeah.
But think about it. What I wanted to share is not just engagement in, regular times. Engagement through change or uncertainty is important now more than ever, right? So what I wanted to share here is, let's look at what happens to someone as they go through change. Engagement is on the left and time is on the other axis. But what happens when an individual, a human being, goes through change in the workplace, their first stage is denial, right? And they don't know what's happening. They may ignore it. Maybe the people exercising outside and not taking, social distancing seriously, whatever it is. But then they get into a level of realization where engagement is pretty much the same. But what happens is then people start getting into this resistance or anger, right? And resistance might be, I don't want to work from home, even though the organization is making me do that. It's changing my daily, my rhythm or what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. Maybe I have to do things that I wasn't normally doing in my work, in my, my job role or in my day-to-day. And typically what happens is people eventually end up into this curve where their engagement gets to the bottom and they're in this world of letting go. And letting go may mean I may just let go and leave the organization or just check out. I think that's even worse. People there that you're, paying their salaries, they're involved, but then they're just not doing anything. Mm-hmm. Now, what happens is people eventually leave at that time, or they start searching for, solace or answers. They eventually get up to an idea of understanding the meaning of change. And that typically when their engagement gets back up to where we want it to be. And then when they internalize those changes, that's when, they start getting to a more engaged place and they're a lot happier in the environment. But the reason why I'm showing this is, again, engagement in regular times is important. Engagement at uncertain times, we have to kind of, I don't want to say flatten the curve. That's a terrible thing to say that everyone else is saying. But we have to make this curve go faster. And what I really want to talk about is in that idea, I want to start getting into 4 approaches to engage employees in these uncertain times. So that being said, I'm going to dive into them right now. And again, if there's any questions, feel free to ask. Right. But the first one is there's no such thing as over-communicating. And what I mean that is that when there's uncertainty, you need to bolster communication. You need to pull it up. So I want to share a couple of points on how to do that in really tactical ways where tomorrow you can make some changes to your communication, approach or cadence in your organization. So a few key points I want to share. The first is you really need to be honest and transparent. And again, if transparency or authenticity isn't a company value today, you have to embrace that and exemplify it any way you can, especially through times of crisis. And I can't overemphasize how important this is. Typically, when you think about a lot of research out there, actually, the Neuro Leadership Institute has some great research. Management transparency is the most significant predictor of employee happiness. Leaders are seen as more trustworthy and more effective. And again, it's that concept of sharing with people what's happening. I guess the best way to think about it is secrecy erodes trust, right? When people are seeing the company scramble, told to work from home, things are changing, but they don't have any context or honesty and transparency of what the company's thinking about or doing. Again, that uncertainty curve just goes longer, right? So the idea is you need to be honest and transparent and let people in of what's happening. Now, there's a difference in just letting people know what's happening versus explaining the why. And that's really the second part, which is you can't stop at what. Right? You can't just say, we're thinking of halting hiring. We're thinking, we've let go a percentage of our workplace. You have to basically provide some more insight to why the organization's making those changes. It's the worst feeling to have something done to you with not, again, a good comprehension or understanding of, the impact of that decision. And I've had some companies say, we're letting go of 20% of the organization, or we're asking salary workers to take a pay cut and give that to hourly workers. But when they start sharing the metrics behind it, how it's important in terms of keeping the company in business, impacting the deliverables they need to make. Again, when people get to that realization or searching for answers on that curve, again, if you think that you're just telling the company what you're doing and not giving context, it's not going to be very valuable to them from that perspective. So again, communication needs to be not just honest, but it has to be really focused on why the decisions are being made. It makes them more involved in that process. Now, other thing about kind of not stopping at what is really setting a frequency rhythm and change communications if necessary, basically at the end of the day. Best thing I like to say here is during a crisis, people need to be informed, right? And I would say it's not crazy to inform people daily. I mean, every time we have our daily tango every day, we have a meeting and we make sure that we're communicating anything that's happening, possibly changing things we're thinking about. But if you're a large organization, you might want to get more into this weekly or kind of more frequent cadence where everyone sits down to be able to have those conversations. And the other part of rhythm is your rhythm is probably disrupted when everyone's working remotely. So change your communication vehicles if necessary, right? You may do things in person. Maybe you can't do it anymore. I really love this post. I'm connected with someone, Joanne, on LinkedIn, and I saw this. She works with a large organization, and this is her CEO, keeping communication open, giving us an update and answering our questions. So again, it may not be the normal rhythm, but it's creating a rhythm. And I've seen actually multiple posts of this over time, over the last couple of weeks, where the CEO is saying we really need to communicate and let people know what's going on. And we can't do it in person. We do it this way. Or even that thing in terms of communication vehicles, maybe not everyone's in the same time zone. Maybe you record something and send it out. So again, it's just really setting that rhythm and changing the vehicle if you have to.
Question for you about this, and you're never mind. You literally are answering it. I was immediately thinking, okay, communication is not just outbound. So here we go.
Yeah, and that was kind of the last, kind of major point is communication is two-way, right? You can't just go one way at this and people are just listening to absorbing. And again, you don't know if they're listening, you don't know if they're comprehending the data. So I think this is one of the most important communication key points. So there's three major parts I'd like to discuss when it comes to this world. One is you have to promote dialogue to build understanding. A really good example of this is, and we didn't invent this, we created it, kind of stole it from other companies, but every week when we do that weekly pulse, we ask employees, ask the leaders, whatever questions you have, we're addressing to the whole organization. And sometimes it's confidential, sometimes it's not, that's fine. But the idea is this is now promoting a dialogue so people can understand. Maybe we announce something that we're doing. Well, now they can ask to get more insight. Maybe there's something that's just not clear, or they're concerned about something we're not talking about. Now we have a dialogue. So when you promote dialogue, there's different little cues or ways that you can do that, but it's important to just do that at the end of the day. Now, outside of just, asking people there, providing the why or helping them understand, the second part of communication is elevate employee listening. So what's really interesting here is, in our world, we're always helping companies get the voice of employees for engagement, onboarding, change management, anything that's happening in an organization. But what a lot of our customers immediately did was ask and understand how employees feel about a current COVID situation or their new remote work environment. And when you elevate that listening, now you have an understanding of the sentiment and can start communicating what the organization is doing or not doing about it and the whys. So I always find it's a really important thing to elevate that listening, especially through a crisis. So, yeah. If you're doing the annual engagement survey and waiting for that, it's not going to fly. And the third most important one, and I think this is a big part in terms of, again, engaging people through this process, is adopt an inclusive approach to planning what you're going to do. This concept of employee voice, there's two actually types of voice. One is sentiment. So are people happy, not happy? Do they like the experience? Do they not, etc. But the other important part of employee voice is what we call participative management. It's asking employees, what would they recommend? Like, what would they do in this scenario? How would they change a better experience for their department, division, etc.? So when employees are part of that and you ask them their feedback, and kind of that inclusive approach to planning, now they're not, things aren't just being done to them. They're part of the process of identifying what the changes should be. And you could make this formal, like there's a brutal facts from Good to Great. They use this concept of asking people what the issues are in the company. Each employee kind of votes on what is the bigger issue in priority order, and then you address the top two. But again, employees are part of that planning, as opposed to, just saying this is what we're launching and this is how it is.
Yep.
So hopefully that answered your question in terms of the two-way communication.
Well, it does. And the piece of employee listening, we find oftentimes that organizations may listen, but then their response rate to that feedback is so slow, or it doesn't have any response at all. They really end up, you shouldn't ask if you're not going to do something about it, because now you've got disengagement from people who think you don't really care. And now, why'd you ask if you weren't going to do something about it?
Yeah, it's funny. We always ask the question, do you believe action will take place? And that's a good indicator for leaders or HR folks to understand what people think about it. But the second thing is, we have some companies that they post their teams every 2 weeks, every week, every month. And the idea is that there's no such thing as, survey fatigue or feedback fatigue. There's lack of action fatigue, right? And that's the thing. If you're not going to do anything about it, then don't bother. But if you are, then frequent employee listening is important.
Make it happen. Well, in this piece about adopt an inclusive approach, we have seen organizations do that, and there's always a challenge in HR. How do we change the culture? And that advice right there, adapt an inclusive approach to planning and an inclusive approach to problem solving, and you will see an immediate shift towards greater collaboration, greater communication, greater innovation. Employees initially may not be accustomed to that. They maybe think, am I going to get paid for that? I've heard that a lot in some environments. Or why would I do that? They're not going to listen to me. Or even if we create, great solutions, so that action fatigue still applies. But you got to begin the process of asking for your champions of change in order to move to the next level.
Yeah, if you're an executive or an HR person, I'll assure you that the people on the front lines know a lot more than you do about the organization. So let's understand what that is.
Yeah, fair.
Awesome. So that was the first, is more on the, there's no such thing as over communication during a time of crisis to engage employees. The second is adapt. Don't stop the rituals you already have from an engagement perspective. So don't throw the book out on what you're doing today to engage people. Those things are, again, more important now than ever. So a couple of points on that is, first thing is take stock of the current rituals you have and find alternate ways to make disrupted rituals real. So good example, right? You might do monthly luncheons. You might do events that you were having, in person, town halls. Well, find what those are. If they're disrupted, then change it, right? Do something about it. Do it online. Do it in a different manner. At Worktango, we do drinks every Friday. Well, now we do them online, actually. And we make it a little more fun. We ask people to show what their best, home, their home, something in their home that's actually it's their biggest possession or their most important thing. And we get to know a little about each other. So again, if you have things that are disrupted, just try to make them real in another way. We did our quarterly review where we pull everyone in from Europe and Toronto and Ottawa into one office, and we couldn't do that. But we still went across with that communication and that ritual because it was important to our organization. One thing as well is that, be creative, right? Make best of the situation that we're in. So even if you have rituals right now, try to make the best of it. If you want to add new ones, there's fun ways to do it. I've seen organizations do fun things like bringing their children onto Zoom calls and knowing a little more about their families. Some organizations are, trying to be more personable about it and saying, why are they staying at home? Like, who is this for? So again, if you're creative and make the best of the situation, then you continue to engage people over time. I want to do this thing where we do virtual cribs, like, show your house or something, but we'll see if that flies. A lot of good examples out there. Now, outside of being creative and around the engagement, method and rhythms you already have, the other thing is rally and unify for a bigger cause. Sometimes that engages people in and itself. Great example, we're sharing a pair for free healthcare. Like Crocs rallied their team around getting, pairs of shoes to healthcare workers, right? Really something that's important. Or Krispy Kreme is maybe these people are, working 13, 15-hour shifts. Let's make sure we get them some food or something. And every time I show examples like this, people say, oh, these are big companies. What are they going to do? And I mean, the reality is you can do something whether you're big or small, right? Workamgo is a perfect example. We actually, you can probably see it on my shirt here. We have a passion statement, not a mission statement, to improve work lives. That's important to us. People spend most of their time at work, but these are their lives. So we changed a lot of structures of what we were doing and did similar to what you did at TurnKey, right? We started, our salespeople aren't salespeople. They're educating people. We're trying to get resources to people. We gave free assessments to a lot of our customers or nonprofit organizations to help understand sentiment and do the listening part, in different communities. So you can do that. Maybe you don't have a solution like that. Do a montage video. Tell people to send a video at home and share it with someone and send that out. I've even heard companies be creative and say, they realize that no one's at the office and their office is a huge parking lot near a healthcare facility. So they said, well, hey, healthcare workers, go park there for free, right? Why pay for parking? So again, there's ways you can be creative, but if you can unify and rally people around a cause, that's a really great way to start building engagement in different ways above and beyond what you're currently doing today. So the biggest point there is don't stop what you're doing when it comes to engaging employees. Try to make it work given your new environment. So that's number 2. The third, in terms of how you engage people in uncertain times, is emotional intelligence wins over intelligence during a crisis. I'd like to say that hands down, that's always true. But I definitely think it's more important when you're going through these types of times. So EQ wins over IQ for sure. Now, a couple of thoughts and ways you can focus on kind of emotional intelligence and how you can help employees engage them through this time. Is first thing is just understand what employees are going through at the end of the day. We're all human beings, so whether we're at the top of the chain, the bottom of the chain, side by side, people are going through things. And I always frame it in a way that people can understand is that every person you're looking at, talking to on social, on Zoom or whatever your calls are, or speaking to in your organization, there are typically 3 layers of uncertainty that drive down engagement for employees. The first is external, so what's happening in the environment around them, right? This is COVID, right? We don't know what's happening. There's so much uncertainty about when this is going to end, what it's looking like, right? There's a lot of uncertainty around that. I'm someone personally, I'm supposed to be getting married in about 8 weeks, and I don't know, is that happening? Is it not? But that external environment is impacting me. Then there's organizationally, right? You might have forced people to work from home or do roles that, they're not typically doing. And then individually, some people are uncertain about their actual job status itself, right? Or what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. So I find when you focus on this type of, emotional intelligence and understand people's layers of certainty in these 3 layers, now you can really empathize with them, right? And my point there is if you're going to talk to someone, understand those 3 layers, because what's crazy in a crisis is all 3 are happening, right? Like it's not just one that's happening like typical. These are all 3 happening to individuals. So people are way more uncertain than they've ever been. So my advice to people is, just make sure you're listening and understanding. Make sure you're acknowledging and relating. And if you can understand and relate, good example is, my gosh, I don't know what it's like to have to do your job day to day when there's 4 kids running around and you have to homeschool them. And I don't know what that's like. But at the end of the day, I'm going to try to be genuine and understand what people are coming from. Now, when I talk about emotional intelligence and empathy, some people's eyes glaze over and they're like, is this really important? I always bring it back to this. And I know what you're thinking, HR 101, Maslow's hierarchy, what are you doing? Why are you talking about this? But bear with me for a second. At the bottom, and I'm thinking everyone on this call probably knows what Maslow's hierarchy of needs are, but at the bottom, those are your base needs, physiological and safety. And then you obviously get to belonging and self-esteem, etc. What I've always thought being a business leader is that at the end of the day, when it comes to an agreement with an employee, the contract they have, as long as they can pay for food, water, and shelter, they have their physiological needs met and safety needs met, right? There's a job tomorrow, etc. That's kind of the base things we need to do as an employer or a leader. Then we have to focus on belonging, self-esteem, etc. But the reality is like people are worried about the bottom 2 right now, right? So some people's core needs aren't being met at the bottom side. So when you start thinking about empathizing what's important, we really have to think about, the employees from that perspective as well. Now, to have a little fun with Maslow, to get, not as serious, I think there's other base needs like Wi-Fi and battery. And the new one that's kind of come out is toilet paper. I think that's a really, important one these days.
Yeah, I think so.
So again, the first thing is focus on what employees are going through, and hopefully that helps put that in the right lens. And also, and I recommend at this time, if you have a big company, put your leaders through empathy training, help them understand this, because some people it just doesn't come innate to them. So it's something you might have to walk through. The second is double down on gratitude. Remember, your employees are likely going through things that they're not used to. Recognition is an intrinsic motivator. It costs you nothing. Right? At the end of the day, if you're recognizing people for going above and beyond, getting through this time, it is going to hit their intrinsic motivation and be a positive reminder of that someone cares about them as an individual. So double down on gratitude. It's easy. If you want, I mean, what we do is every week we have, at the end of one of our rhythm meetings, we don't have to create a new meeting. We just put a recognition thing on the agenda, right? And people can recognize others for living our virtues, etc. Or if you have a platform, obviously double down on it as well. The other part is just connecting on a deeper sense of purpose. So it kind of gets back to what I talked about earlier, but if your organization can help out in different ways, whether it's Burberry making trench coats or Labatt's making, hand sanitizer, even though they're used to making beer, or even a small company, what I was talking about, we improve work lives. Like we can't manufacture anything, so we're educating and doing whatever we can. I find when you connect on a deeper sense of purpose, that really drives engagement from an emotional intelligence level. And the last thing I want to mention is we always focus on engagement, and engagement is a big word, right? There are many things that drive engagement, but my recommendation to people is don't just think about their engagement at this time of uncertainty, think about their well-being. And what I mean by that is a couple of pointers. First is we need to provide support where we need it to normalize stress. So think about your employees. They might have a physical stress in their life. They're not used to working at remote with kids running around. They're not used to, I've had a lot of teachers that are using, conferencing software for the first time in their life. Right now they have to teach kids. So they have all this stress, but sometimes it's mental, right? It might be isolation, not leaving the house under lockdown. Think about the people that are working on the front lines, the stress going through their world. The idea is that we all need them to bounce back from this stress, especially the mental stress. So wherever we can provide, support, we need to be able to think about their well-being, and that's being flexible. That's, meeting them halfway, make the employee increase their sense of control over what's happening around them. But think about their well-being, again, not just their engagement. And a good way to do that is if you're having empathetic conversations, thinking about, their world and really doing that, just set a structure of checking in and staying connected, right? I have something in my calendar every 20 minutes or 20 minutes every day. I'm reaching out to a few people with a thoughtful message or a thoughtful conversation. It's not hard, but it's showing those individuals that we care. We're here for you. We get that it's unprecedented times, right? We understand. But I find if you can set something, especially if you're a leader or a business leader, something that thinking about their well-being and checking in on that goes a long way. So that's the third one. And the last is, it's kind of a reminder that leaders are critical during a crisis. And what I mean by this is typically when there's a crisis in your workplace, people go to HR, but I'm telling you, this is not an HR issue, right? This is every leader, executive, every leader in the organization. The way I like illustrating this is every time we think about an HR strategy, whether it's crisis at the bottom or an engagement strategy or whatever it is, we think it rolls up to HR and then HR rolls it up to the business. But the way we need to be thinking about this, and your leaders have to be bought into, is you have a business strategy, but your people strategy aligns with it and actually combines. So it's every leader that needs to make this people strategy a reality, right? Whether they're in HR or not. And I truly believe that leaders are that secret weapon in order for you to help get through this crisis. Another good point on that is what a lot of companies have seen done be successful is they've created a quick crisis team. And that crisis team is not just HR, it includes a main champion or component of different divisions or parts of the organization. Now, what's interesting is that in this idea of leaders being key, first thing is be clear about who's accountable. Make sure there's alignment at your leadership team level or executive level that this is important. But then bring your leaders together and align them. Like have this conversation. Just like we talked about employees earlier, about them having more buy-in when they're part of the process. If your leaders aren't part of the process of identifying what the organization is doing or understanding the reasons why decisions are being made in these uncertain times, they're not going to be bought in, right? Think about this scenario. in most daily worlds of our organizations, we have executives at one end of the system that are making the strategic decisions. We have employees that are conducting behaviors every single day.
Yep.
Well, leaders are at the middle, right? Leaders are making sure communication's happening, driving things together, and really the glue that keeps that together. In a crisis, what happens is if you don't align your leaders and they understand why companies are making decisions, etc., what happens is I liken it to like a cog in the system. Employees are going to start asking leaders why these decisions are being made, what's happening in the organization. And what happens is they don't have the answers. They feel disengaged in themselves because they're not in the loop. And I always say that they're that cog in the system. When they fall apart, the rest of the system falls apart. So again, your leaders are so key in this time. They have to be part of the process. They have to be accountable to making sure that they're educated as well as providing the right conversations. And really, again, we need to lean on them when it comes to crisis time, not just HR.
So in your experience there, Rob, I think that it goes without saying that some of our leaders will be better equipped naturally,
Yeah.
right? For us to lean on them and for them to express empathy and to understand the importance of not just communicating one way, but two ways. How might leaders and HR go about quickly shoring up some of those gaps? We don't have a long lead time for helping someone grow those competencies right now. So we need some faster responses. What would you suggest that HR might do now in the short run to shore up some of those?
Yeah, so I think there's two things. One is, again, if empathy training is not in the books or from a quick perspective, it actually leads to a bit of my second point. I've seen some HR organizations saying, we are trying to mandate more one-on-one conversations for our leaders, right? So have the conversation. Here's some guidance on how to have that discussion, questions asked to really start driving that conversation. So I find that's one thing that really works, and it does build that connectiveness and really, it's that check-in, right, to an employee that they actually care about, my well-being. So just sometimes it's the action of doing it as opposed to the training of, having the right conversation. The other one is storytelling. So when companies can tell an empathetic story, people remember that way more than they remember theory. So when I told you about empathy and the 3 layers, if I would have told you about someone's specific story and how much it hurt and their individual thing, or maybe you empathize with my marriage, who knows what's happening, like it's kind of in the air because of COVID and things being shut down, you remember that a lot more. So I find stories might help people with empathy right away. Great.
You're right about that. That is something that HR can support leaders in understanding pretty quickly. Even those of us who haven't practiced storytelling, we have stories. And in one of our sessions earlier, we learned about the importance of being vulnerable, being honest, being authentic. And we may not have all of our managers and leaders possess those skills out of the gate, but if HR can support that dialogue, these are the values that we know are going to hold us together right now. And these are the actions that we can begin to take. What is your advice on this? Promote more one-on-one conversations. If that is mandated, and there are just some who are just simply not skilled at listening and speaking, how might we avoid the fallout from that? Or what advice would you have to, prevent some of the disconnect that could be a result of those mandates?
Yeah, I call those like the beer and wine answer. I'm like, ooh, I could grab a beer and talk about this for an hour. But,
okay, good.
But
yeah.
The quick thought on it is, first off, okay, when you say you're making something mandatory, they're leaders, they're adults, right? They need to be treated as such. And some of them might do it and some might not.
Right.
Now, I think the one thing is that when I think about HR and what their goal is, it's not to handhold and do things for people. It's to enable leaders to be successful. So the first thing that HR can do is enable that through connection of why this is important. Actually, funny, a slide I was going to hide that I showed here was, here's an example of great leaders and their impact on engagement or satisfaction versus ones that, that are poor leaders. And this is just based on, so there's data around there to share with people of why things work and why they don't. I also find that if you start tying this type of data to other data, like showing leadership engagement in the organization for ones that are actually conducting one-on-ones versus not, I find that helps as well. We do that a lot of research with our customers to say, here's proof in organizations when you actually check in, you're seeing a more improved employee at the end of the day in many different facets, engagement, performance. But at the end of the day, it's really providing them with the guidance and the enablement, right? Again, you can't have the conversations for them. So some companies make it accountable, right? Some companies have engagement scores or different kind of pillars that impact comp, right? Some companies get really specific on that. In a crisis, you're probably not going there because you don't want to start changing policies and stuff at the moment. But that's kind of a couple of things that come to mind based on that question.
It's brilliant. And I know I want to make sure you share with us, how exactly does WorkTango help with this? You know, your platform is about engagement and fostering higher performance and fostering commitment and loyalty and satisfaction and all of those things. And we haven't even touched on leveraging technology at this time, really, to do this very thing. Will you share that with us?
Sure. Yeah. I'm always embarrassed talking about WorkTango in these forums, but at the end of the day, that's basically what we do, right? Most companies, they're used to sending an annual engagement survey. It takes 4 months to get the data from a vendor. By that time, sentiment of your employees have changed, they've moved, and it's not as agile for how quickly our employees work. So what our technology does is help companies get feedback for whatever purpose, right? Engagement, et cetera, onboarding, you name it, change management, serve that data in real time. And not just to HR. Some companies serve it to every single leader in the organization to see just their team or departments. And that's when you see accountability, and that's where you see action. The system will then start nudge leaders to recommend actions and learnings based on that feedback. So the idea is, how do you start getting the sentiment of employees and acting in a much more an agile and faster way? And again, not being a one-size-fits-all solution at the organization from an HR perspective. So that's high level what we do. But technology, especially when people aren't sitting around and you could see how they're feeling or working at their desk, it does allow that ability to make it a lot easier.
And so the touch points are key there. It's, if we're managing folks differently, obviously, and we're either making, phone calls all the time, or requiring people to come on a meeting with us, or in some cases, even monitoring their actions on their computers, et cetera, right? How exactly do you encourage that just the right amount of touch points, where it's not micromanaging, it's not too much, but it is enough for that two-way dialogue and engagement to be fostered?
Yeah, I always say it depends, right? It's the worst answer, but the reality is some companies have that culture where they check in frequently, some don't. It's kind of a dial, not a switch sometimes, right? Like in terms of what that looks like. So depending on, like, we always assess what's happening today from a communication cadence, try to be more specific to the individual company. But like I said, some companies are checking in every week. Some are doing it every year, right? There's a huge discrepancy there. So it really depends on what the vision looks like and why you're checking in as well, right? Is it for just engagement? Is it other purposes? Is it diagnostic on what's changing in the company? So another beer and wine answer.
Right. For sure. Well, and I know that you have also, you're giving away something pretty specific to WorkTango, which is just a survey template. Tell us a little bit about that remote questions for that remote work and COVID-19, and I'll share with people how they can grab a hold of that.
Yeah, we basically, in light of all this, we tried to help our customers understand sentiment right away to navigate through this change. So many of our customers have taken us up on it, and we just decided to share those publicly. So it was, if you wanted to do it, you don't have to do it with WorkTango. Just find out, here's our right questions to be asking to understand what's the sentiment of my employees in this really uncertain time. So yeah, definitely share that with the team here so that they can leverage it in their companies.
I'm going to send that through the chat box. There's a link that we created where you can grab that pretty quick, and I'm sending that right now. Very good.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that. Maybe what I'll do is I probably have a couple of more things I wanted to share, and then I'd love to answer as many questions as out there. But the last part is pretty quick. I did want to share with just people with where do you start, those 4 mindsets. And I think this is a good place to check boxes. Have we done these 4 things, especially at this time, as a quick kind of reflection of maybe what we can be doing. So first things first, we just talked about that. Actually know how employees feel, right? 94% of companies actually do engagement surveys to understand if people are engaged, but why don't they get feedback from employees or do that two-way communication when it's crisis time, when people need that connection? So we've kind of talked about that, but do you actually know how they feel? That's the first part. The second is actions speak louder than words. There are a lot of organizations where leadership is doing something that different than what they said, kind of that do as I say, not as I do. So if your leadership and executives are going into the office and you're requesting everyone to change their lives, it impacts the engagement of organizations, right? And some, even in some organizations, they're, still giving their executives a raise in the company, but then killing heads in the organization, right? And that's not a really good message. So the idea is, if you're going to go down this road, make sure that we're very clear that your actions speak louder than whatever you tell people on any call or any conference out there.
Well, and I suspect as organizations really begin to open up the two-way dialogue, and when employees begin to feel safe at expressing their truth, it'll come out.
Yep.
What the heck is going on at the top when the rest of us are having furloughs? And you want me to buy into the mission of we love our employees first? Mm-mm.
Yep.
Be your actions, buddy, not your words.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's a big one. And we forget that sometimes, right? Because we forget about how impactful leaders are in terms of what they do. People are watching. So that's a really important one. Third is lean on your community. I'm a part of this community called PPG. It's the People group. It's about 1,000 HR leaders, and it's a Slack group. And every day there are fantastic resources, templates. I ask for them sometimes. People are just sharing them. And my gosh, there's a community that has been through this before. They have some insights. You are not in it alone is kind of the message here. So it's always great. It's always the reaction to just jump and do stuff. But if you come up for air, take a breath and say, who can I lean on? Someone is there to help you. So I find there's really good communities. Don't forget that you're not alone in this space. And the last thing in terms of a mindset, it kind of answers your questions about how frequently you should check in or monitoring what employees are doing, is trust your employees, period. At the end of the day, you need to trust them. And the way I like to really emphasize this is I want to ask everyone, if you have a calculator in front of you on your phone or in front of you or on your computer, if you can type in the number 35,000 into that calculator right now, I want to kind of share a little bit of an exercise here. So type it in. Hopefully you got your calculator.
Yep.
Then what I want you to do is multiply that by how many employees you have in your organization. So and then hit the equal sign. So everyone has a number there they're looking at. The reason why I want to pardon me?
It's a big number.
Yeah. So basically the reason why I ask people to do that is human beings make 35,000 decisions a day on average. And think about it. If you had 500 employees, there's 17.5 million decisions being made every single day. Guess what? You can't manage them. You can't, force them. You need to think about ways where, one, you have to trust them in these new environments. You need to relax your policies to make sure that, we're reflecting this new environment. And at the end of the day, they're your employees. You hired them in the first place, right? You must trust them. And we just need to treat them like adults. I always say that there's this thing called, I don't even know where I read it, but I always loved it. I keep trying to find it, and I can never find who said it, but it says, trust, you're either building it or eroding it. There's no in between, right? Yeah. You can't come back from, there's no purgatory of trust, right? Like you're building it or eroding it. And this is where we really need to treat people like adults. We know their lives are changing, and we want to talk about engaging in people, trust them. Really great example of that is the last organization I used to work for. This was our employee handbook. It fit on one business card. We gave it to employees and we said, this is our handbook. The company name was Achievers. We use our common sense, have respect for others, grow professionally and personally, create value, and treat shareholders' assets as if they were on. Right? So when you think about trusting your employees, it goes a long way in a time of crisis for sure. So just a reminder again, understand what employees are feeling, actions speak louder than words, lean on that community, and make sure you trust them. So I wanted to leave these last thoughts and then 10 minutes of questions is final thoughts for everyone in this world of uncertainty. It's more important than ever. Like you need to start thinking about, of what you're going to do in this world. Again, adapting what you currently have. It's not something you just kind of leave at the wayside. So just remember how important it is when people are going through that uncertainty curve. The second is these are defining moments for you as a company and the leader, right? Like think about that. Like what employer brand you have based on the decisions you make. You as a leader, kind of the impact, all these decisions you're going to make at this moment in time are really defining moments for you and your company. And last thing is that think long-term. Like your workforce may not be the same coming out of this, right? When there may be people not working in the office again, there may be huge changes. So I always think long-term, but I would recommend doing a retrospective with your organization of what your team did well or not well when it came to this whole pandemic. What I find is if you reflect on what you've done in the past and have that retrospective, what worked well, what didn't, what were we going to do differently next time? Now you can kind of bring that information into any other crisis or any other situation that you find yourself into. So that being said, I love this quote. Douglas Conan from Campbell Soup: "To win in the marketplace, you must win in the workplace." So remember those first slides about the markets and what companies are hiring. At the end of the day, it's really about your employees, where it needs to start. So hopefully this gives you some good insight in terms of where you can start those conversations and really engage people in times that, we don't want to be in, but, we have to face at this moment in time. So, yeah.
Absolutely. So oh, good. I was going to say, how can folks get a hold of you?
Yeah, so email, all the social media feeds, send me a Bitmoji. Those are my favorite. But yeah, hopefully this gave people some good things they could take back as well.
Absolutely, Rob. I do want you to share with us. So let's say that an organization hasn't implemented some kind of an agile platform like Worktango. Is now the time to introduce something that they've never used before? Tell me about the pros and cons of that.
Yeah, I mean, there's both, right? From a pros and cons perspective, right? If you're a small organization, change management's pretty easy to manage. So doing something like this now is pretty simple and easy. But it's also being respectful to people have other priorities at the moment, right? So it's kind of this, understanding your company and what, the state of the nation in that world. Like, let's be honest, some companies are growing and hiring and doing things. Some companies are not. So I find that, if your company's doing it right now and technology is not making it easy, then you're not really doing anything other than just a better mousetrap, right? Like, it's a better way to do this in a faster way. So I think it's worth going through that method. But in the concept of just listening to employees, again, this time I think it is important to get people focused on this world. A lot of our customers, what they have done is they actually have delayed anything they were doing from an engagement perspective and focused on what are people thinking through this time. Like, are they engaged at working from home? Do they understand what's happening in the organization given the COVID situation? So I think it is the right time. I think if you were changing your performance management system and process, and that's something you probably avoid because it's got so many other peripheral items that play into it, and comp, et cetera, and rolling out new policies is going to be really tough. But something like listening to your employees, I mean, truly that can happen at any time.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Beautiful. And what would you recommend if someone wanted to just test things out? Do you guys have a demo, an easy on, easy off kind of experience?
Yeah. So what we're doing now for any nonprofits, we're walking through that process and offering it for free. If we still have people that are purchasing the platform, et cetera, and giving them all the things they would need to get up and running, which is pretty simple. And then that's why we gave the other resource as well, is you may not want to be at a time to have another vendor or another platform use those, whatever method you're using today, verbally, another survey platform, et cetera. So I think there's kind of something for everyone was the hope coming into today as well.
Good. Excellent. Excellent. Well, this has been fantastic, Rob. I really appreciate your time. Folks, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you joining us today as well. And do reach out to Rob or to myself if we may be of service.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me, by the way. Really appreciate it.
Likewise, Rob. This has been really, really focused and helpful. So I appreciate you sharing your expertise.
Awesome. Thanks.
All right. Stay safe and healthy, everyone. Bye, Rob.
Take care.